is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering deep wizardry. Get it? Deep, like water. By Diane Duane. Brought to you by Sea Star. One chapter equaled 50 pages this time. And it was a pretty fucking heartbreaking chapter in a lot of ways, even though nothing has actually quite happened yet. This book is a lot. Diane Duane is a lot. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Sea Star, who is here in the chat right now for commissioning this week's episode. This chapter was just like so enormous. Foregathering Song is the name of this chapter. I'm going to check and see, actually, are they numbered? They're not numbered. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this is 11. Okay. And Sea Star has posted a bunch of comments in the Crowdcast here that I'm going to share with you guys about marine biology. Sea Star is a marine biology educator. And she says, I wrote a lot of commentary on this book's accuracies and inaccuracies when Mark Rees covered it. I didn't know he covered it. Oh, I should go. Well, no, I shouldn't check that out because I bet I will get spoiled. I'll post a few here from previous chapters. Sharks definitely die of natural causes, though lifespan varies widely between species and is, in some species, very difficult to determine in the wild and tends to be much lower in captivity. Yeah, when she said they don't die of natural causes, I definitely side-eyed that as I was reading it and was like, that does not sound right, but I'm just going to let that go for now. So thank you for clarifying that. Clams don't eat humans. If you stick a hand or foot between a giant clam's shells and they close on it, you will be trapped and drown. Otherwise, they are harmless. That's fair. I don't remember that part that you're clarifying. Did they think that they were going to get eaten by a clam? I don't remember that being mentioned, but I would not have thought that was a thing. Are clams vegetarian? Or I guess they're bottom feeders, so they will eat waste, right? Which is not necessarily plant-based. So not vegetarian, but they don't eat like living matter. Is that true? Correct me on that. Coral does exist in the North Atlantic, but mostly in deep water. The only hard coral with the rocky skeleton on which reefs are built, coral in the shallower parts of the Northwest Atlantic is the northern star coral, which forms very small colonies. Nita might have seen it, or soft corals, which decay after death, but she definitely didn't see brain coral. Okay, gotcha. If Ed is 90 feet long, he's more than twice the length of the largest whale shark on scientific record. The biggest generally recognized shark species, thrice the average length of a whale shark and considerably bigger even than extinct megalodon sharks. That's big. Ooh. Yeah, Ed seems pretty intimidating, so I'm willing to give him a bigger than any other shark we've ever seen. Mark Reeds is very rigorously spoiler-free, with all spoilers posted in Rot 13 by commenters. Oh yeah, I didn't really mean that. I meant more that when you search for things, I will tend to either get... I don't like to read other people's coverage of stuff other than maybe something like Westworld, where other people are definitely figuring it out along with you and they're not reading ahead or watching ahead. Something like that's currently airing, I'm okay with. But when it's stuff that that people have read and are theorizing on, even if they Rot 13 stuff, they will oftentimes imply spoilers and not even mean to. And even though they are pretty strict, and I know that because Mark Reeds is where I got the idea to do Unspoiled, I have started to get way too good at being able to read between lines, and I don't even like to do that. Plus, he's really smart, and he may theorize on something that I never would have thought of and plant an idea in my head. And I'd like to go through it as if I'm reading it completely the way that I would normally read something all alone. and see if I can come up with theories on my own. Clams eat plankton from seawater. Tom apparently told Kit they were giant man-eating clams in the abyss. Okay, gotcha. And Devin is here. Hi, Devin. So, all right, let's get started on this section. This basically has, this whole chapter is mostly about Nita coming to terms with what she has agreed to do and the various choices that she has in front of her should she decide not to go through with it. It is a really tough read because as an adult, it's really hard to read when it's a little kid. Like, you know, what are they, 11 again? Like, they're so small that these kinds of decisions resting on their shoulders, like as a child, when you read YA, you just take it for granted that people are going to be in mortal peril. And if they're kids, it doesn't like register to you how wrong that is because you don't have any perspective yet. And as a kid, you're like, well, that's how these go. Of course, you might get killed, like Harry Potter, or even something like, what's the one with the unicorn that gets stuck in the swamp? But you know what I'm talking about. Like, the risk is just something you take for granted. It's like a cartoon where people fall off cliffs and, well, that's just what happens, whatever. And as an adult, reading this and knowing that it's not just mortal peril, but that she has to consciously make this choice, it's not a moment of impulse. This is something that is being planned out, that she has to consciously like take on. That's really intense. And also, as an adult, there is a whole different understanding of what it really means to die. The never-ending story. Thank you, Devin. And understanding from when we were 11, all of the things that we have gotten to live and experience, and knowing exactly what she will miss. Not only that, but I can, despite a lot of this hitting me harder as an adult, there are parts of it that I feel like would be tougher to deal with as a kid. For example, I always had absolute confidence in any story like this that people were going to get out of it somehow. That at the last second, somebody would swoop in, something would happen, whatever. And I think as a child, if I were reading this, I would have felt that way until this chapter when she sits down and has this talk with Tom. Or is it Tom or is it Carl that shows up? But yeah, I think it's Carl that shows up. It's Diane Duane has like gone out of her way to make it really clear that you can get out of it, but there are going to be consequences for that too. And as a child, I think I would have been really upset by how the doors were closing. If it feels like you're watching the possibilities for her escape be like dissolve in front of your eyes. And there is a certain feeling of being trapped that comes with that I remember from a couple other stories that I read as a kid. And I'm trying to remember what they even were, but those hit me really hard when I was younger. And I can't help but wonder how I would have dealt with this if I were a kid. Because this is just so intense. So the way this is described too is like we start off with Nita on the beach, just like waiting for the day to start and so that she can like get this over with. You get the sense? She's by herself while Kit is in the kitchen dealing with her parents. There's so much about the setting of the scene here that's really like intense to me. She had gone to bed with the feeling that everything would be all right when she woke up in the morning. But she'd awakened to a pair of parents torn among insane curiosity, worry, approval, disapproval, who drank cup after cup of coffee and stared at the lump of lunar pumice in the middle of the table and made little sense when they talked. She hardly knew them. Her mom and dad alternated between talking to her, hanging on every word she said, and talking over her head about her as if she weren't there. And they kept touching her like a delicate thing that might break, though there was an undercurrent of anger in the touches that said her parents had suddenly discovered she was in some ways stronger than they were, and they didn't like it. Nita sighed. I'd give anything for one of Dad's hugs that squeeze the air out and make you go squeak, she thought, or to hear Mom do Donald Duck voices at me. But fat chance of that. She let out a long, unhappy breath. Kit was finishing his breakfast at a leisurely pace and handling endless questions about wizardry from her parents, covering for her just as well. She had other business to attend to before they left. So that's so rough. And this is something that when you do deal with a lot of YA where there is mortal peril, in the vast majority of cases, the parents are not aware of what's going on. Either because they are neglectful, because they are dead and, the kid is has guardians who are sort of oblivious, or simply because everything is secret and hidden. And for her parents to be aware of what's going on and not quite, but almost aware of the potential sacrifice that she's going to have to make is even worse, because if you love someone, there is nothing quite like the pain that comes with seeing them in pain. It's the kind of thing that I am still not used to, because when I was younger, it was a lot easier for me to disconnect myself from people. And as you get older, depending on the kind of person you are, of course, for me, I have started to feel things more deeply and decide that I'm going to trust and open myself up to people more than I used to. And it is so painful to see somebody that you care about dealing with something incredibly difficult, and to know that you're causing that, and it's unintentional or unavoidable, is the worst. And that's if you are dealing with a relationship but when it's your parents and it's an abrupt change like this, where they just had this conversation, they just talked about this and told them everything last night. This all changed overnight, literally. That is a huge security blanket that has been ripped away, and nothing will ever be the same again. Ever. That's just, there are some things you don't take back. You can't erase. You can't, and that's super difficult for me, is this moment with her parents and realizing and not only the fact that they're worried about her, but the weirdness of them realizing that in some ways she can do more than them, and they resent that, which of course you would. I mean, there has to be a feeling of injustice knowing that your kid has this kind of power, and you gave birth to that child or, created that child, and you don't have that kind of power. And where is the justice in that, So yeah, this whole setup is really a lot more than I expected in terms of emotional. This series apparently is just going to be emotional all the time. And I should be used to that after what happened with the finale of the last book, but I'm not. So she's calling out to Tom in her head, and unexpectedly, Carl appears, and he is wrapped in a towel. And he sounds wicked hot, by the way. He's a man with one towel wrapped around his waist and another draped around his neck. Tall, broad-shouldered, and narrow-waisted, with dark hair and the kind of face one sees in cigarette ads, but never hopes to see smile. Which I find weird. Never hopes to see smile. What's that about? But yeah, I was just oh, what's up, Carl? Yeah, he is not aware of what's happening yet. And he says that her call was so strong that he definitely kind of had to answer it. And he agreed to sort of take Tom's messages because Tom is in this big meeting right now. So he sits down with her and she explains what's happening. Though she braced herself for it, the look of shock on Carl's face when he heard about Nita's accepting the Silent Lord's part was so terrible she started to leak tears again. Carl sat still while she finished the story. "Do your folks know?" he said at last. "No," Nita said, "and I don't think I'm going to tell them. I think Dad suspects, and Mom knows he does and doesn't want to talk to him about it." So she says, "I can't just die." And Carl says, "Well, yeah, you can," he said at last, gently. "People do it all the time, sometimes for much less cause." Carl, man, coming out here with that truth. He's not wrong, but it's really intense to just say that to a kid. Just saying, Carl. But you know what? She's in a life or death situation, and it's not time to play around. He asks what she said she'd do, and she doesn't even answer because they both know the answer to that. And he says, "Remember the blank check sorcery that you did while in the other Manhattan that time? The open-ended request for help? That kind of spell always says that at some later date, you'll be called upon to return the energy you use. You got your help. But it must have taken a lot of energy to seal a whole piece of another space away from every other space forever. But the spell never said anyone was going to have to die to pay back the price. No, all it said was that you were going to have to pay back the exact amount of energy used up at some future date. And it must have been a very great amount to require life price to be paid. There's no higher payment that can be made." Carl fell silent for a moment, then said, "Well, 1. And his face shut as if a door had closed behind his eyes. What is that about, Carl? Well, 1. And his face shut. I don't care for that at all. That's definitely going to be something we hear about later. And I don't want to. I don't want to know. Keep it to yourself. Devin's crying in front of his friend. I'm sorry, Devin. Yeah, this is going to just, I just have to accept that these books are I'm going to be crying intermittently all the time. Carl, there has to be something we could do. Nita, no. What you absolutely do not want is something you could do. What you really want is for me to get you off the hook somehow so you don't have to carry through with your promise. Her head snapped up in shock. You mean you don't care if I die or not? I care a whole lot. The pain in Carl's voice made it plain that he did. But unfortunately, I also have to tell you the truth. That's what seniors are for. Why do you think we're given so much power to work with? We're paid for what we do, and a lot of it isn't pleasant. Then tell me some truth. Tell me what to do. No, he said gently. Never that. 9/10 of the power of wizardry comes from making up your own mind what you're going to do. The rest of it is just mechanics. What I can do is go over your options with you. So first, what you'd like to do. You want to break your word and not sing the song. That'd be easy enough to do. You would simply disappear. Stay on land for the next week or so and not have anything further to do with the whales with whom you've been working. That would keep you out of the song proper. You'd be alive 3 days from now. But then he tells her, first of all, if you break the oath, you will lose your wizardry. More than that, you will forget that magic exists and any relationships with other wizards would collapse and disappear. You and me and Tom would not be friends. You and Kit would not be friends. And the group that was meant to sing that has to deal with you breaking your word will have to try and replace you, which they probably won't be able to do. And even if they did, you sabotaged your oath, which means that the song won't be effective. And the lone power could potentially enter into the wizardry because of the break that you created. by going back on your word. If all the other wizards in the area worked together, we might be able to slow it down, but not for long. And on top of everything else, breaking the celebrant's oath will also be a violation of the wizard's oath, your oath to assist in slowing down the death of the universe. In your last moment as a wizard, as you lose your magic, you will know beyond all doubt that the universe around you is going to die sooner because of your actions. And all through your life, there'll always be something at the bottom of your heart that feels sad, and you'll never be able to get rid of it or even understand it. Whoa. Whoa. In terms of consequences, that's pretty much worst case scenario in every sense. And he says, you know, you wouldn't die, and your family would probably suddenly get an urge to, like, go visit family somewhere out of state so they'd be safe from everything that happened here, and you would be able to go on and live a normal life. And he says, this quote was highlighted by 24 different people, according to Kindle. After the trouble, you would go on to live what would seem a perfectly normal life. After all, most people think it's normal to have a nameless sorrow at the bottom of your soul. Oof. I mean, let's be honest. It is sort of normal, unfortunately. What's normal and what's healthy aren't the same thing. But that's kind of normal. So, second option. You go down there and you sacrifice yourself. You experience some intense pain. You die. And then your parents and friends have to deal with the fact of your death. The good side of this is that the song will be successful. You will have saved a bunch of people. My estimate is that it couldn't interfere in any large way with the sea's affairs, and to some extent with the lands, for some 40 to 50 years afterward, possibly more. 40 to 50 years, honestly, in the grand scheme of things, is not a very long time. But that's almost, you know, I would wish at least that you would get a full human lifetime out of sacrificing your own life. But what are you going to do? There's a third option, Carl said. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully decipher. Sing the song and make the sacrifice, but do it willingly, rather than just doing it because you have to keep terrible things from happening. Does it make a difference? Carl nodded. If you can make the sacrifice willingly, the wizardry will gain such power as you can barely imagine. The Lone One's power is already based on its desire to have its own way in everything. Nothing undermines its workings faster than power turned towards having something be the way someone else wants it. I have to make real sure you understand this. I'm not talking about the sort of fakery most people mean when they talk about sacrifice. None of that unselfish business, which usually has the desire for other people to feel guilty or sad hidden at the bottom of it. Not being a martyr. That would sabotage a wizardry almost as badly as running out on it. But to willingly give up one's life for the sake of the joy and well-being of others will instantly destroy whatever power the Lone One has currently amassed. That doesn't mean you couldn't be afraid and still have it work, by the way. The important thing is that other times, when the sacrifice has been made willingly, there have been fewer wars afterward, less crime, for a long time. The death of things, of the world as a whole, has been slowed. I don't know if I could do that, Nita said, scarcely above a whisper. There was a long pause. I don't know if I could either, said Carl, just as quietly. You guys, it's too much, it's too much. So she starts to say something, and he points out Time Heart, because she's like, if I choose not to do this, I won't know you. And he's like, you know, well, somehow our knowledge of each other would continue to exist there. What's loved, Carl said, lives. She looked at him in a few moments sorrowful wonder. But sure, she said, you're a senior. You must go there all the time. No. In fact, the higher you're promoted, when you're a wizard, the more work you have to do, and the less time you get to spend outside this world, except on business. I haven't been to Time Heart for a long time, except in dreams. Now it was his turn to sound wistful. Nita reached out and thumped Carl's shoulder once or twice, hesitantly. So, he tells her to give the two of them a call before they start the song, if she can, which we find out later. She cannot. And he starts to leave, and she finally gets up and throws herself at him and just sobs for a while, which seems reasonable. Call me crazy. But yeah, that feels like a thing that you would do. Nita, he said, if you do, thank you for the 10 million lives that'll keep on living. They'll never know, but the wizards will, and they won't ever forget. A lot of good that'd do me, Nita said, caught between desperate laughter and tears. Sweetheart, Carl said, if you're in this world for comfort, you've come to the wrong place. Whether you're wizard or just plain mortal. And if you're doing what you're doing because of the way other people will feel about it, you're definitely in the wrong business. What you do has to be done of how you'll feel about you. The way you did it last night with your folks. There are no other rewards. If only because no matter what you do, no one will ever think the things about you that you want them to think. Not even the powers. All right, Carl. You know what, buddy? Why don't you go on home and shut the fuck up and stop it, because I don't like it. How about that? Enough with all this truth and shit. I don't know who asked for this, but it wasn't me. And, right here, it wasn't Nita either. So, get the hell out of here, sir. You're ruining my goddamn day. Ugh. Too much! Okay. So, she finally goes and says goodbye to her parents. And tells them, like, we may be back tonight. Look for us on Monday. The whole thing is just so, like, there's so many layers of meaning to their goodbyes. It's just really tough. And they go out into their water and transform into their whale selves. And Kit is really upset and is trying to cope with it, but does not know how to do that at all. Because this is another thing, is watching your friend try, like, being asked to do something and you really can't step in. Like, Kit, later they talk about this and he says that he doesn't think he could do it. But even if he were willing, I don't know that she can break her word and he takes her spot and this all works out the way that it's supposed to. I think that, when she made her pledge, that made it so that this magic doesn't work if it's not her. But yeah. And he tries to say, like, that he just hates being helpless and she wants to not talk about it. And he's like, we have to talk about it. It's tomorrow. And she says, well, fine. Tomorrow we can worry about it, but we have today to worry about right now. And then asks, are we even in the right place? And he's like, do you not hear that? Are you kidding me? And she stops and listens and she realizes that there are so many whales here. So many whales. I love this description of all these sounds. Sweet high flutings that cut sharply through the intervening distance. Clear horn calls as if someone hunted under the waves. Outer spacey whistles and warbles like the electronic cries of orbiting satellites. Deep bass scrapes and rumbles. Lawnmower buzzes and half-tone moans and soulful sighs. And many of those sounds, sooner or later, came back to the same main theme. A series of long, wistful notes, slowly ascending into pitches too high and keen for human ears, then whispering away, lost in the quiet breathing of the water. That is really cool, and I want to hear it. I want to hear, like, a movie where they have all these whale sounds just piled on top of each other and how crazy that would be. So they hear all of this from like really far away. They don't even see how many whales there are quite yet. And once they do, they've realized that there are literally hundreds. So the amount of space they must be taking up, like, this would be so cool to see. I just can't imagine. All of these different types. And Kit likes crowds. So for him, this isn't bothering him at all. But Nita is, like, getting some anxiety over this. And she's trying to find a way to, like, zero in on some familiar people. And manages to find Hot Shot at one point. I think she gets, Arun passes by. And then here comes the part where I really did almost start crying. Stillness swept over the spectators as she approached with Kit, and they recognized who she was. And a single note began to go up from them, starting at the fringes of the circle, working its way inward to the celebrants, until she heard even Arun's giant voice taking it up. One note held in every range, from the dolphin's dog whistle trilling to the water-shaking thunder of the blues. One thought, one concept in the speech, trumpeted through the water with such force that Nita began to shake at the sound of it. Praise. They knew she was the silent one. They knew what she was going to do for them. They were thanking her. Stunned, Nita forgot to swim. Just drifted there in painful joy. All right. So this is what we're going to be doing. Okay, cool. Just rip my heart out. Why don't you throw it in my face? Just throw it. Ugh. So she gets introduced around to all of these different whales, dolphins as well. There is a killer whale here that she has a kind of instinctual reaction to, because apparently humpback whales and killer whales are like natural enemies, which I did not know. And this is just so like wild. And the fact that there is an audience makes a ton of sense, because this is a momentous event. And of course, everybody's going to know it's happening. But I also did not think about the fact that there was going to be a crowd. Because why would you? You know, there's obviously the way things operate here is a little different underwater than it is on the land as well. I'm not sure how this would go with, like, you know, I think I said in the last episode that, like, once we find out that Nita is going to have to die, that Jesus probably was doing the same thing as she is called to do here. You know, if you are a subscriber to that kind of mythology. And how much of a crowd was there? And were his apostles wizards? Like, I'm really digging this line of thought, you know. Did they all know what was going on and they all agreed to sing this song together? Which is actually a way more moving story to me than what it is written as in the Bible, and I prefer that version. Sri led Nita off to the north, where several of the singers were working together. "We've been through the first part of the song already this morning," said Sri, "the name songs and so forth. I've heard you do yours, so there was no need for you to be here till late. We're up to the division now, the temptation part. These are the people singing the undecided group." "Hi, Hotshot," Nita sang, which the undecided group being led by Hotshot feels incredibly appropriate. And one of the whales is playing the forager's part and is just eating like crazy and barely pauses to like do the introductions before going back and eating like crazy again, even faster than before, to make up for lost time, which I found really charming for some reason. And she meets the listener, who is called Thicky, with a couple exclamation points in there. When he spoke, his song revealed both great surprise and some unease. "Sweet, this is a human." And Nita immediately like reacts with, "Oh, Jesus, are you going to give me a hard time again?" And he's like, "Oh, you met Ariane, have you? Well, don't worry about it. She's kind of a pain in the ass, and we're not all like that." So they get along pretty well. And then she meets, Roots is the one that, is foraging. And then there is Fang, who is the killer whale. And it turns out that Fang is kind of amazing. I feel like I like Fang. I can't tell. I don't remember if Fang was male or female. But Fang, like when she doesn't know how to respond right away, says, "Shark got your tongue?" Which I was just like, that is so wrong. That's messed up. But that is, the fact that it's messed up is what makes Nita laugh. So yeah, that was kind of a nice moment of just being like, yeah, this sucks, doesn't it? Okay, so they talk about how there is a storm coming. Oh, sorry, Sea Star is commenting here. Whales have magically traveled from around the world for this song. Gray whales from the Pacific. They were obliterated in the North Atlantic around 300 years ago. Oh, okay. I didn't realize that's what this was like, doing time travel as well. Gray's beaked whales, aka Scamperdown from the Southern Hemisphere, and narwhals, bowheads, and belugas and Fang from the Arctic. Are gray whales, when you're saying they were obliterated in the North Atlantic 300 years ago, they exist in other oceans though? I thought for a second that you were saying that they were obliterated completely and were like extinct and they were still here and that they had like traveled somehow through time to be here. But I think I misunderstood you. Sowerby's beaked whales eat bottom-dwelling invertebrates and fish, not seaweed. No whales eat seaweed unless Roots is a vegetarian maverick. Oh, okay. Because what it was that he like was rooting around in the kelp. Yeah, here it is. And second later was head down in the kelp again, ripping it up faster than before, as if making up for lost time. So I don't know if they rip it up in order to find the fish in there or what's going on. But in any case, gray whales are extirpated from the Atlantic, so these came from the Pacific. Okay, cool. Roots does seem to be eating kelp. I headcanon that she's a vegetarian. That's fun. Well, her name is Roots, so maybe that's, maybe that's a later in life name. Once she made her choices, she decided to change her name to reflect her new identity. So yeah, they start talking about this storm coming, and it's definitely, there's no way that they're going to miss it. They won't be able to complete the song before it arrives. It's like half a day away. And they have to sort of take their chances and hope that that they're either going to be deep enough that it won't be able to reach them, or that even if it is out there, they'll still be okay and be able to manage doing this. Ariane greeted Nita with cool cordiality and went back to her practicing. And let's see what it is. Fluke, this is Nit. Fluke's eyes were small, his vision poor, and he had an owlish, short-sighted look about him that reminded Nita of Darine in her glasses. The likeness was made stronger by a shrill, ratchety voice and a tendency towards chuckles. "Fluke?" Nita said. "I was one," the sounder said. "I'm a triplet, and a runt, as you can see. There was nothing to hold my own with my brother and sister except to become a wizard in self-defense," which is pretty adorable. Let's see. Fang, are you from these waters originally? Indeed not. I came down from Baffin Bay for the song. That's in Canada. 1,500 miles. What? Oh, a great many lengths, yes. I didn't swim it, Nit, any more than you and Kit there went where you went last night by swimming. I suppose, she said, that a wizardry done like that on such short notice and taking the wizards such a distance might have been noticed. Might! I should say so by everybody. But it's understandable that you might want to indulge yourselves anyway, seeing that you and your partner won't have much more time to work together in the flesh. Fang's voice was kind, even matter-of-fact, but Nita wanted to stay away from the subject for the moment. Right. Speaking of which, Sri, hadn't we better start? From the top, Sri said. And this is when they begin. And these are actually some, kind of cool poetry. Blood in the water I sing, and one who shed it. Deadliest hunger I sing, and one who fed it. Weaving the ancient-most song of the sea's sending. Singing the tragedy, singing the joy unending. So they're in the middle of this when Ed shows up. And it's an interesting conversation that happens between her and Ed. The first thing he says is basically, "You're angry." And Nita is like, you fucking think? Yeah. I didn't know I was going to have to die. And he's a little surprised and says, well, sometimes whales actually compete for the privilege of singing your part. Like, yeah, you die, but the death isn't that terrible. It just comes a little sooner than you might otherwise have died. And it buys the renewal of life and holds off the great death for the whole sea for years. And even if the Silent One should happen to suffer somewhat, what of it? For there is still Time Heart, is there not? The heart of the sea? It is no ending, this song, but a passage into something else. How they extol that passage and what lies at its end. There was a faint, scornful amusement in Ed's voice as he lifted his voice in a verse of the song, one of the blues cantos. Past mortal song, that sea whereof our own seas merely hint, pours shadows likewise cast from what is real, where time and swift-finned joy are foes no more, but lovers, where old friends swim by old friend, senior to death, undying evermore, partner to songs unheard and voices hid, songs past our knowing, perilously fair. And it's an interesting thing. He is talking about Time Heart and says, like, well, you're a wizard, so you must know about it and must have been there. And basically, it's like, if you know about Time Heart, if you've been there, if you've experienced it, what he's essentially saying is you have more reason to go into this calmly than anybody, because you have a direct connection that you've experienced and you have wanted to go back. So why aren't you dealing with this better, essentially? And this is when Nita is saying, I am way younger. Like, I'm not sure exactly how aging works with the whales, like what time of life she looks to them like she's in now that she is transformed, if you can tell how young they are or what. But, you know, she's super young, and she's talking about the fact that there is way more life to live, that there is so much more left to do. Because Ed is like, well, you're living right now. You've done that. And she's like, no, I haven't. There's so much more to do. And I'm like, barely getting started here. And finally she asks if it really is going to hurt. Like, does it have to? And he says, what doesn't? Even love hurts sometimes, you may have noticed. And here comes the conversation about love. Love, what would you know about that? Nita said, too pained to care about being scornful even to the master shark. And who are you to think I would know nothing about it? Because I kill without remorse, I must also be ignorant of love, is that it? You're thinking I am so old in order of life that I can know nothing but the blind white rut, the circling, the joining that leaves the joined forever scarred. Oh yes, I know that. In its time, it's very good. And yes, sometimes we wish the closeness of the joining wouldn't end. But what would my kind do with the warm blood sort of joining, the long companionships? What would I do with a mate? He said it as if it were an alien word. Soon enough, one or the other of us would fall into distress, and the other partner would end it. There's an end to mating and mate, and to the love that passed between. That price is too high for me to pay, even once I swim alone. But sprat, the matter of my loves, or their lack, is hardly what's bothering you. No, she burst out bitterly. Love, I've never had a chance, and now Then you're well cast for the Silent Lord's part. How does the line go? Not old enough to love as yet, but old enough to die indeed. That has always been the Silent Lord's business, to sacrifice love for life, instead of, as in lesser songs, the other way around. Have you truly had no time to love? Mom and Dad, Nita thought ruefully. Darine, that's not love. I don't love Darine, do I? She hardened her heart and said, No, Pale One, not that way, not that way. Well then, the song will be sung from the heart, it seems. You will still offer the sacrifice? I don't want to answer the question, Sprat. It was a long while before Nita spoke. I'll do what I said I would, she said at last. The notes of the song whispered away into the water like the last notes of a dirge. Now here comes the thing. She was glad Ed said nothing for a while, for her insides gripped and churned as she finally found out what real grown-up fear was. Not the kind that happens suddenly, that leaves you too busy with action to think about being afraid, but the kind that she had been holding off by not officially deciding. The kind that swims up as slowly as a shark circling, letting you see it and realize in detail what's going to happen to you. Yo, if that's not the truest shit in the entire world. People talk about fear of the unknown, and don't get me wrong, that's like totally legit, but knowing can be worse. Like, it can. If I don't know, I'm going to want to know. I'll think I want to know, at the very least. I'll try and find out. But finding out often does make it worse. And anybody who is old enough to have experienced that kind of fear knows exactly what the fuck I'm talking about. Like, yeah. Yeah, it's just the whole conversation is really quite a lot between the two of them. And it's a weird connection that they kind of have here. And Ed points out to her that he isn't a wizard. And he says that because he isn't a wizard, that there are certain things that he can't experience. And asks, like, don't you think that I wonder what other people are experiencing, what other joys there are, and wish that I could also feel them? And then Nita thinks of, and this is the thing that I was like, sharks don't die of natural causes. What? But, you know, for the sake of this moment, I'll let that slide. Could it be that all these years there has just been one master, and all around him people die, and he can't and wants to? And so he understands how it is to want to get out of something and be stuck with it? Nita was terribly moved. She wasn't sure why. She swam close to the Pale One's huge head for a moment and glided side by side with him, matching his course and the movements of his body. I wish I could help, she said. As if the master could feel distress, Ed said with good-natured scorn. The wound in his voice had healed without a scar. And as if someone else might want to end it, Nita said, sarcastic but gentle. It's dumb to suffer, Nita said. But if you have to do it, you might as well intend it to do someone some good. Yeah, so we will cause it to be well made, this sacrifice. You, young and never loving. I, old and never loved. Such a song the sea will have never seen. So she then gets summoned by Sri and heads out there. The next few hours, while the water darkened further, ran together for Nita in a blur of music and annoying repetitions and words that would have been frightening if she hadn't been too busy to be frightened. And something was growing in her, slowly but getting stronger and stronger. An odd elation. She sang on, not questioning it, riding its tide and hoping it would last through what she had to do. Again and again, with the other celebrants listening and offering suggestions, she rehearsed what would be the last thing she would ever say. See, hear me now, and take my words and make them ever law. Yeah, the whole way that this goes down, if she had read this earlier, she would have gotten the sense of what was actually supposed to happen to her a little bit more clearly. Then let them know whose blood and breath will take the gift and set them free. Whose is the voice and whose the mind, to set at naught the well-sung game, when finned finality arrives and calls me by my secret name. Not old enough to love as yet, but old enough to die, indeed. The death fear bites my throat and heart, fanged cousin to the pale one's breed. But past the fear lies life for all, perhaps for me. And past my dread, past loss of mastery and life, the sea shall yet give up her dead. Past the fear lies life for all, perhaps for me. Interesting little caveat there. Master have I none nor seek. Bring the ailing, bring the weak, bring the wounded ones to me. They shall feed my mastery. Woo, baby. Yeah. So Kit is watching her as she's practicing all of this. And he is not dealing with this well. The whole thing is not going well for him in his brain. She goes up to take a breath, and he pops up, and he tries to talk to her. And she tries to, dive down again and avoid him. And he blocks her, because he's a giant fucking whale way bigger than her, and forces her to come up to the surface again. And he drops the whale sark off for a second, and is in his human form and tells her to be human again also. And they just sort of tread water. And he looked strange, tight somehow, as if he were holding on to some idea or feeling very hard. Neats, he said, I'm not buying this. Kit, she said finally, look, there's nothing we can do about it. I've bought it. Literally. Yeah, he's trying to find a loophole as well. And when he says, I'm you can't get out of it unless another wizard gets you out of it, she says, you loon, you can't. And he says, I know, and it hurts. I feel like I should volunteer, but I just can't. Which, that is pretty rough to know that there might be one loophole and you just don't have the courage to do it. And how you have self-loathing because of that. I'm not sure it would even work, that it would be allowed, like I said. But even if it were, he's I don't think so. Even if we don't both get out of this, I think it's going to be all right, really. No, Kit said again, and that was that. Okay, she said. Be that way. And she meant it. This was the Kit she was used to working with. Stubborn, absolutely sure of himself most of the time. And a courage that would spend a few minutes trembling and then take on anything that got in its way. If I've got to go, that sheer guts has got to survive, and I'll do whatever necessary to make sure he does. What are you going to tell my folks when you get back? I'm going to tell him we're hungry, and you'll fill them in on the details while we eat. I did tell him to be that way. Right, Nita said. So they sit there, treading water in their human forms, probably freezing their balls off. And under the surface, they can hear somebody calling to them finally and telling them that it is time to leave. So they transform back into whales again. And then they dive down. And that is the end of the chapter. So, I don't know what to think. Obviously, I know Nita's going to have to come out the other side of this. I don't think that, the Young Wizards series suddenly replaces Nita with a different young wizard. Maybe they do. Maybe it's, a Misfits kind of thing. But I don't know what that looks like. There's the whole, if I do believe that it was that Jesus did this same thing, he rose again. What does that look like? I don't know. I don't know how that works. I would think that if that were something that were that it was possible that is an outcome, somebody would have mentioned it to her, but maybe they just don't know that it's an outcome, or maybe it has to be performed in a certain way for that to be the outcome. I don't know. But yeah, so this is just a pretty emotional book so far. What they're being asked to do is so much more. This is usually something that's like the big finale, like, like Harry Potter, the big finale. The end is finally giving yourself up. And that's not what's going on. This is pretty early on here. So I don't know how you increase stakes from here on out. Like, how much bigger things can possibly get. It has to. She must find ways. But I just can't imagine it. All right. Well, guys, I think I'm going to wrap this one up. This is a really good chapter, though. I'm just so shocked at how long it was that it was just the one, and that took up all 50 pages. Thank you very much to C-Star for commissioning this one and for coming into the chat and sharing a bunch of info with me, because that's really interesting. And thank you to Devin also for coming. Devin says that he's been hearing Michael C. Hall's voice when Ed speaks, which is such a weird choice, but all right, I'll allow it. The voice that I have sort of been hearing is the dude who plays Mike Ehrmantraut from I was going to say The Wire, from Breaking Bad. But I don't feel like he quite fits. So we'll see. I keep picturing somebody in the older side, though, All right, everybody. Well, thank you again so much for listening, for supporting me. You're great. If you want to commission something, I have a new site set up, and there's a couple redirects. You can go to unspoiledpodcast.com/shop if you want to see some of the other stuff in addition to commissions that you can purchase. And there is also unspoiledpodcast.com/commissions if you just want to go straight to the site where you can commission different things. So, yeah. Thank you all again, and I will be seeing you soon, because I believe next week Devin booked me for the next section. So I will be seeing you very soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.